Hello, my name is Daniel. In this video, you can learn how to add new items or content to the project. To create a new armor, you need to use Armor Data Table. Here you can duplicate the existing row and choose the type of your armor, head or body. Here you need to choose the socket you will connect this armor to, and the connected blueprint itself. I will duplicate the existing mesh to demonstrate. Let's also create a new blueprint that will be connected. Here you need to select the same skeletal mesh as in the data table, and you can add here anything you want. For example, we can connect particle. Now you need to initialize new piece of armor in the items data table. We need to do this to be able to interact with the item in the world. So here we need to find another piece of armor first. Now we need to duplicate this row. Here we have an armor data table reference, but we need to choose the new slot from the armor data table. Here we need to change the name of the inventory slot, its size and image. We can set a custom interact item here. We need to do this if we want to spawn a searching blueprint when we drop this item on the floor. We can make a screenshot in many different ways. I am using Thumbnailer plugin, but here we will just make a screenshot. Now we can use this item. To create a new bag, you need to use bags data table. Here you can duplicate the existing row and choose the bag or belt types. Type depends on the slot you want to put this bag to in the inventory itself. To have an inventory in this bag with a custom size, you need to find the existing inventory widget by clicking on the search button in the inventory row, for example. Don't create a new one, just duplicate existing inventory widget and choose your size. Make sure it can fit in the general interface. Now you can initialize your new inventory widget in the bags data table. I will duplicate the existing one and change its mesh to demonstrate. You need to do this to be able to interact with this item in world. Connected blueprint is the blueprint that will be connected to our character in the gameplay. You can duplicate the existing one, initialize its skeletal mesh and add any component you want, particle for example. Now, after you changed everything in the bags data table, you need to add information about the bag to the items data table. Here we can change the size of the inventory slot, set custom image, change the name. Let's create our custom interactable item. We need to do this if we want to spawn searching item after we dropped it on the floor. To create a new usable item, you need to use usables data table. Here you can choose if you want to regenerate, choose instead, or if you want to add points instantly. If you choose regeneration type, you need to set the rate and the seconds of regeneration. Eventually, you will regenerate the value in this row. Now you need to initialize this row in the items data table to be able to use it. Here we need to choose our new data table row from the usables data table. We can also choose new icon, size of the inventory slot, its name, sound, and so on. We can also create an interactable blueprint. We will add this item to our inventory after we interact with it. In the sound trap, you can change its mesh and sounds. You can create a child actor out of the sound trap blueprint and set it up, or you can do this with a custom blueprint in the world. In this blueprint, you can also change the length of the cable. This sound trap will set enemies in investigate state. This class will let you interact with your custom object and do anything you like. Create a child actor out of the simple interact actor. Here you can select any mesh you want. To add your custom logic, you need to override interact event. Notice that I am overriding server event here. If you need to call this logic for everyone, you should use multicast event after server event, but this is only for the multiplayer projects. Here I show an example of custom logic. You don't have to have the exact same logic. You can open the door in 3 different ways: on interact, with a key, with a lockpick. You can create a custom key using the others data table. Just duplicate the existing key row and set your mesh. Now we need to create a row in the items data table. Select created key row from the other data table and select the name, icon and its size. You can create a custom interactable blueprint for this object, but only if you want to have a custom interactable blueprint in the world. To make a custom door, find openable door blueprint and create a child blueprint. In this door, you can override open, close and interact events. Don't forget to call parent logic to have the same functionality as the base door. In this door, you can select an item to open it. Select your new key. Don't forget to select need item variable to true. You can create a lockpick using the same way. In the door settings, choose your new lockpick and set can be lockpicked to true. Explosives are very easy to set up. You can create a child blueprint out of the explosion barrel and change mesh and effects, or you can change these settings in any blueprint of the same class. The same situation with the mine. It is important to set placed to true. In the blueprint you can change the mesh in the mesh component. To create a new craft ingredient, you need to open all the items data table. In this data table, you need to select its mesh. Now you need to initialize this row in the items data table. Take metal row for example and duplicate it. Now change the data table row to the new row. Change the name, image, sound and size if you want. Now you can create a custom interactable blueprint if you want. You can add to this blueprint any components you want. You will get this item to your inventory after you interact with this blueprint. Let's use gold as a craft result. Here we need to select the row with an information about the gold from the items data table. This is a result of the craft process. In this row, we also need to select array of craft ingredients. Here we can use the existing ingredients. for example metal and alcohol. Here you can also choose an amount of items you need to have to be able to craft the result item. To create a new type of ammo, we need to add a new row to the ammo type enumeration. To handle this new enumeration, we need to add new row to the ammo data table. Here, you need to use the new type and the static mesh of the item. Now we need to add information about this row to the items data table. Duplicate the existing ammo type and initialize data table row. Here you can also set its image, sounds, size, or name. You can add a custom interact object if you want to add some stuff to it, but you don't have to. Interact object lets you put this item to your inventory. Now you can use this type of ammo in any existing weapon. Make sure that you have ammo in your pockets. To create a new grenade type, you need to add a new enumeration row to the grenades type. Now you need to initialize this type in the grenades data table. In this data table you need to duplicate the existing grenade row and select the new type. Now you can change the mesh of the grenade, its damage or radius if you are using apply radial damage. All this information is not being automatically applied, but you can use it in the logic you will add to your grenade. Icon will be displayed in Grenades menu. Let's create a blueprint of the grenade itself. This object is a projectile with overlap and hit events. You can bind hit event. Here we are using it to blow the fire grenade up. In this blueprint, you can also add anything you want. Components, light, particles, and so on. Explosion timer is being used to call an explode event after some delay on begin play. You can set it to true if you want. Explosion events happens in two places, in the player's component and in the grenade blueprint itself. You can disable event in the grenade by setting need effect variable to false. In the grenade blueprint, you need to add logic to the type of the grenade you are using. In the grenade, we will print and play the sound. You can also add any logic you want in the grenade component. Now we need to use explode event. We will set timer after we hit something. Now we need to add information about this grenade to the items data table. Duplicate the existing row of some grenade. Here you need to set the created row from grenades data table, image, size, name, and sounds if you want. Create a blueprint that will be connected to your hand in the throw process. Select your grenade mesh here. Create a new interactable item using the existing interactable blueprint. Here you need to select the new grenade row from the items data table. Select these blueprints in the items data table row. In the grenade blueprint, you need to select the type of the grenade and row of its type from the data table of grenades. To create a new clip modification, you need to open modifications data table and duplicate any patternage row. In this row, select the mesh of your modification and set to the max ammo the amount of ammo you want to add to your weapon. In the weapons array, you need to select rows from items data table that this modification will be able to be applied to. Select the custom socket name in weapon and its texture in modifications widget. Now you need to initialize it in the items data table. Duplicate a row of existing patternage. Set the created row to the table row variable. Change the name, texture, and size if you want. Now create new interactable blueprint. You can change this blueprint however you want. Just select the row you created in the items data table. Now in the items data table, select your interactable object. This object you can drag to your world to be able to take it in the gameplay. Now we need to add the mentioned socket to your weapon. Open your weapon and add the socket. Make sure its name is the same as the name in data table. To create a new muzzle modification, you need to open modifications data table and duplicate any muzzle row, silencer for example. In this row, select the mesh of your modification and set to the damage the amount of damage you want to add to your weapon. Select the custom socket name in weapon and its texture in modifications widget. In the weapons array, you need to select rows from items data table that this modification will be able to be applied to. Let's make sure we have this modification type available in our selected weapon. Now we need to initialize it in the items data table. Duplicate the row of existing silencer, set the created row to the table row variable, change the name, texture and size if you want. Now create new interactable blueprint. You can change this blueprint however you want. Just select the row you created in the items data table. Now in the items data table, select your interactable object. This object you can drag to the world to be able to take it in the gameplay. Now we need to add the mentioned socket to your weapon. Open your weapon and add the socket. Make sure its name is the same as the name in the data table. To create a new scope modification, you need to open Modifications data table and duplicate any scope row. In this row, select the mesh of your modification and set scope settings. In these settings, you can choose if it is a scope or not. By scope I mean the real scope with lens. In this example, it is just a small scope, so I will not set this variable to true. You can see an example of real scope in the scope x4 row. In this row, I'm using different blueprint to connect a scope with a lens for an optimized method. You don't have to do this if you are using default optimized aiming method. Now you need to select zoom options. These options will replace base zoom options of your weapon. Now the most important part. We need to set custom settings for our weapon. We need to set the location of aim camera and its DOS settings because it is another scope. We need to make sure rows in this array are synchronized with rows from weapons array below. In the weapons array, you need to select rows from items data table that this modification will be able to be applied to. Select the custom socket name in weapon and its texture in modifications widget. Now we need to find the right camera location and DOS settings for our modification. For this, we need to find connected mesh of our weapon and drag it to the world. We need to add a static mesh component to this blueprint and select our mesh of modification. Now we can move the aim camera to the right location. Place location of the aim camera to the modifications data table when you are satisfied with the result. Now you need to do the same with those settings. Activate aperture and focal distance and find the right values. Put these values to the modifications data table. After you finished everything, you just need to delete the connected blueprint. Changes will not be applied to the original one. Let's make sure we have modification of this type in our weapon. Go to the modifications data table, find your weapon row and check available modifications. Add it if you don't have the one you need. Now you need to initialize it in the items data table. Duplicate a row of existing scope. Set the created row to the table row variable, change the name, texture and size if you want. Now create the new interactable blueprint. You can change this blueprint however you want. Just select the row you created in the items data table. Now, in the items data table, select your interactable object. This object you can drag to the world to be able to take it in the gameplay. Now we need to add the mentioned socket to our weapon. Open your weapon and add the socket. Make sure its name is the same as the name in the data table. To create a new type of modification, you need to open modifiable part enumeration and add a new row. Now, to have a base texture, open modification base texture data table and select the texture you want. To create a modification of a new type, you need to open modifications data table and duplicate any row. In this row, select the mesh of your modification. To add a new characteristic, you need to open Modification Characteristic Structure. In this structure, add any setting you want, but remember that you will need to bind this value in code. In the weapons array, you need to select rows from items data table that this modification will be able to be applied to. Select the custom socket name in weapon and its texture in modifications widget. Now we need to add the mentioned socket to our weapon. Open your weapon and add the socket. Make sure its name is the same as the name in the data table. We can also create a custom blueprint for our modification. You can add whatever you want to this blueprint. The most important thing is to initialize the static mesh component with the one you selected in the modifications data table. Now you need to initialize it in the items data table. Duplicate a row of any existing modification. Set the created row to the table row variable. Change the name, texture, and size if you want. Now create new interactable blueprint. You can change this blueprint however you want. Just select the row you created in the items data table. Now in the items data table, select your interactable object. This object you can direct to your world to be able to take it in the gameplay. Now we need to change recoil characteristics in code. First of all, connect the recoil values in the get modifications function. Now open weapon component, recoil function. Here we will change the recoil value using our modification. To get a modification, we need to have a reference to our player. Get ovna in the component will return the reference of the ovna of the component, our player. Now we should get an equipment component and drag a get current modification function. In this function, select your modification type. Now we can use its characteristics to change the amount of recoil. We are using plus because recoil is a negative value. To use damage characteristic from the handle modification, you need to open distance damage function and add damage to the existing variable.